Welcome, everybody, to the Sheridan Report. The Sheridan Report is brought to you by BetNow.eu. Make sure you go to BetNow.eu, put in the promo code TRUTH50 to get a 50% cashback bonus on your first deposit up to $1,000. I am your co-host for the Sheridan Report, Mike Goodpaster, and right now I'd like to welcome in Bobby Sheridan. How you doing, Bobby?
Hey, Mike, I'm doing great, and I'm ready to roll with some baseball this week, and I'm happy that we already started the day off with a nice tennis winner from the ATP this morning. Nice $1.55 on that. So I'm feeling good about that and ready to go on some baseball.
All right, Bobby, get us started.
All right, Mike. Well, we got no three-team parlay today, no mix and match. It's a short schedule, and I wasn't able to find even two of the favorites that I felt comfortable tying together, so I stayed off of that completely. But we do have two dogs tonight that they're both classified as top plays. So this would be a straight bet on each and a parlay between the two, and that plus the ATP winner is your whole day. And I'll give both out on air. And the first one, Mike, is the Chicago White Sox tonight. This is a 4:10 start at Wrigley Field. We've got a classic case where you've got a Cy Young candidate, Lucas Giolito, who's 10-2 for a team that's under 500, but a team that's, and we've talked about the White Sox, Mike, this is a coming team that's under 500. I believe this will be a team that will be in the race next year for the division, and we're just before that is happening, so they're a team that can definitely win a game or two in this series at Boston. And why not tonight with their best pitcher on the mound at plus more than $1.50, Mike? I'm seeing them right now at plus 158. So Lucas Giolito, you go back, his last 7 starts, 5 of them are 1 or 0 runs. The other is 3, which is a quality start. He had 1 start, 1 outing, which was the last outing. And I'm going to draw a line through it. And what that outing was, it was at the Cubs, interleague game, went 4 1/3, gave up 6 runs, still had 9 strikeouts in 4 innings, so the stuff was there, but he made mistakes on a day where the wind was blowing out at Wrigley, and that can happen to anybody, Mike. So I'm going to draw a line through that start, and I'm going to go back to the last 6 to where he dominated, and he's picking up wins every time out. He's a guy that goes 8, 7 1/3, 7 2/3, 6, 9. So he hands the ball to the closer, and that's what you need in today's baseball, Mike. You don't need anybody else to give yourself the best shot. Starting pitcher to the closer would be the best way to go. The other 4 guys in between there and those games that require that are just throwing the high fastball at 98, trying to get it by the guy swinging, uppercutting, and he might hit it 450 feet or he'll strike out, and that's the crapshoot in what we call the second game, the 6th through the 9th. So don't need that with Giolito. I think he'll go 8 tonight, hand the ball to the closer, and we'll have a W at plus 150, 158, did I say, right? Yeah, so 158. So that's the first part. Now we go to the second part, and it's the same time, Mike. It's a 4:10 Pacific time start, and we've got the Royals at Cleveland. Now we're looking at a plus $1.65 on Kansas City. And where they fit, Mike, is they come back now after going 0-14-2 in the last 16 series. They've come back now to win 2 and split 1 in the last 3. So they're putting together their best stretch of baseball. Good young team, some good young hitting, some improved bullpen, and some improved starting pitching has got them playing improved baseball. And they're in the division. And they're coming off of a homestand, very successful for their standards, especially. Coming off of a homestand, they're hitting the road off of a big win yesterday, and I love that. We've talked about that before. They're not facing anything special tonight. Adam Plutko, who is a number 5 type pitcher for the Cleveland Indians, he's along those lines. And why not beat him with Brad Keller? Brad Keller is a guy, let me pull up his numbers for you. He's a guy that we also, if we can excuse the last start, he's a guy that we can go with. Last start was at Seattle. Don't know what happened there, Mike. 7 earned in 4 innings. But if you go back to the previous 2 outings, it was 2 earned in 15 innings, key in the division. That was against the White Sox and Twins, divisional battles. He goes 15 innings, 2 earned. Okay, well, where are we tonight? We're in the division, Mike. We're Cleveland. And I think Brad Keller, who was a Rookie of the Year candidate a year ago, I think he's going to fire a big shot tonight and give Kansas City a real big chance in that ball game at too high of a number. This thing is too high. Kansas City's plus 165. So, $100 better would put 100 on each, maybe a 50 par. And that's my favorite bet, Mike. 2 power dogs, straight, and a parlay. And that'll be the baseball for tonight.
All right, Bobby. And if you want to hear Bobby talk more baseball and myself, tomorrow we'll have Lucas Weiss and Steve Risley, of course, on Survive in Advance at 1 o'clock Eastern, where we will discuss what happened with the Mets manager over the weekend. Plus, we're going to talk about analytics and whether it is helped baseball, ruined baseball. We'll talk a little PEDs in baseball and just basically the state of the game. If you like betting baseball, make sure you go to BetNow.eu. Use the promo code TRUTH50, TRUTH50. Make sure you play in the Grand Slam contest. And we are going to give you a quick commercial break to tell you a little bit about BetNow's Grand Slam contest. Make sure if you enjoy betting on baseball to go check out BetNow.eu's Grand Slam contest. A weekly winner will receive $5,000 in cash, and there will be 5 consolation prizes given out to the top 5 finishers. Make sure you go to BetNow.eu and use the promo code TRUTH50 to get a 50% cashback bonus on your first deposit. All right, guys, we are back. Make sure, Truth50, promo code at BetNow.eu, where you can get a 50% cash bonus on your first deposit up to $1,000. All right, Bobby, we are on this day. What do you want to talk about today?
Well, we'll get to that in 10 seconds, Mike, because I want to let the listeners know that parlay, that 2-team power underdog parlay, pays almost 6-1. $100 gets back $583 right now as we speak. So plug that in, bet both straight, and I believe you got a big shot to go 2-0 tonight. Okay, Mike, on this day, we got a boxing one, and you know I love those, and I know you love talking about them as well. So it's great for the fans to listen to this boxing stuff. And 1968, Joe Frazier TKOs Manuel Ramos in 2 rounds for the heavyweight boxing title.
Yeah, and that was, of course, after Ali was stripped, so I don't really think it was for the heavyweight boxing title, but it was the New York State Athletic Commission title, which Frazier had won a little bit, or his fight before against Buster Mathis when the title was vacated. They didn't fight in the tournament. Frazier didn't want to be in the tournament. The other organization had to come up with a champion. So the New York State Athletic Commission created their own championship, which he won. And I don't think that much could be said about Joe Frazier against Manuel Ramos, which ended in 2 rounds. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Joe Frazier, because I think he's a guy that doesn't get the respect that he deserves. And he was the guy that grew up, I think he was the youngest of 12 children, which that's rough enough. His parents were sharecroppers. They never had much money. By the age of 15, Frazier, who had quit school 2 years earlier, was on his own. He moved to New York City to live with his older brother and find work. Employment, however, was very hard to come by back in them days, and especially when you drop out of school when you're 13. And to put cash in his pocket, he started stealing cars and selling them to a junkyard in Brooklyn. But Frazier, from the time he was a little kid, had harbored dreams of being the next Joe Louis. And I remember reading in his biography and seeing interviews where he would talk about, getting burlap bags, filling them with leaves and moss and hitting them, acting like he was Joe Louis. And when he came north, Frazier's love for boxing didn't subside. And after moving to Philadelphia, Frazier found work at a slaughterhouse. Now follow along, Bobby. At that slaughterhouse,
Okay.
He routinely punched sides of beef stored in a refrigerated room. That scene inspired what, Bobby?
I know what you're going to say, Mike. Inspired Rocky.
Yeah, it didn't inspire Rocky, But it inspired Sylvester Stallone in the 1976 Oscar-winning film Rocky to use that in the movie. And the other thing is this: Joe Frazier was one of the finalists to actually be Apollo Creed. And if you remember, in Rocky 1, they introduced Joe Frazier before Rocky fought Apollo in the first fight. And
That is
you had,
right. Wow.
yeah, and you had a moment where he goes and he shakes Rocky's hand, then he goes over and he plays around with Apollo Creed, and they're talking about fighting each other and stuff. But Joe Frazier, actually, since he was in the movie, and that is what inspired Sylvester Stallone to use. I've got to say it this way because I think it's funny. But this is why Sylvester Stallone had Rocky beating his meat in a slaughterhouse. And that was because Joe Frazier did. I mean, Joe Frazier beat the meat in a slaughterhouse, so Rocky did. All right, I just had to get that out of the way. That was bad. That was crass. Is that what they call crass?
I guess so, Mike. That's all right.
It was still funny.
Any of the
though.
women listening to our show, they love sports and they get it. It's nothing big. It's just a good joke.
All right. I don't really care either way. But and then under direction, I mean, he meets Yank Durham, and he becomes a boxer, and he quickly found success. 3 straight years, he won like the Middle Atlantic Golden Gloves Championships. He captured the gold medal in 1964 at the Summer Olympics in Tokyo. The interesting thing there is he had lost in the box office to Buster Mathis. And Buster Mathis was like this huge man that weighed 320 pounds, but he had some really great skill. And he beat Frazier, but he got hurt. And Frazier was an alternate on the Olympic team since he lost in the Olympic boxing trials and was second place. And Buster Mathis could not perform in the Olympics. That's how Joe Frazier became the Olympic gold medalist. He stormed through Tokyo, kind of like Godzilla and Megalon, in 1964, and he wins the gold medal. He turns pro, and after about 10 or 11 fights, he finds himself in the ring at Madison Square Garden against Oscar Bonavena. Oscar Bonavena was a tough son of a bitch. And Bonavena, this I think was like 1966, and Bonavena was kind of a burly, plodding fighter, had a big mop of hair on his head, called him Ringo. He actually was killed in the mid-'70s under mysterious circumstances. But Bonavena put Frazier on the canvas twice in the second round, but he couldn't keep him there. And Frazier comes back. He's relentless, punishing, wins a close decision that could have went either way. I think the decision was like 5-4, 5-5, and 6-4. Unofficially, the UPI and the AP both had Frazier winning because the other thing is, in New York back then, they didn't the knockdown didn't get you anything but winning a round. So today, that would have been a 10-7 round. Oscar Bonavena probably wins the decision then, and it changes the course of history.
Wow.
Because you don't have Ali Frazier, 2 undefeated heavyweights, fighting for the title in 1970. You got Ali against Joe Frazier, who'd lost those Oscar Bonavena. And if you remember, Ali had stopped Bonavena in the 15th round to fight right before the Ali-Frazier 1 epic. After Bonavena, Frazier continues fighting really good fighters. He goes to the Olympic Auditorium in L.A., and he fights Eddie Macon. Eddie Machen was a damn good fighter, and Frazier knocked Machen through the ropes with a left hook in the first round, and he ended up stopping him in the 10th round. And Machen, who had fought everybody, he was an older guy then, compared Frazier to Rocky Marciano after the fight, saying he was a tough kid that was going to go a long way. So before you even get to his 15th fight, he's beaten 2 top 10 contenders. Then he fights Doug Jones. Doug Jones, interestingly enough, 2 years before this, or 3 years before this, I think, was a man that a lot of people thought beat Muhammad Ali. And Frazier goes into the fight against Doug Jones. I think he was only like a 9-5 betting favorite, and he stops Doug Jones in 6 rounds. And once you do that, combined with the Machen and the Oscar Bonavena, you've already got, by the end of 1967, people talking about the possibility of Muhammad Ali fighting Joe Frazier. We'll get to that in a minute, but you go later into 67, he fought the great Canadian heavyweight George Chuvalo. Chuvalo is one of the toughest guys you'll ever find. The interesting thing about Chuvalo, he was a Canadian heavyweight champion for 21 years. He fought Foreman, he fought Ali twice, he fought Frazier. He got stopped in the 4th round in this fight. But the interesting thing about George Chuvalo, fighting Foreman, Frazier, Ali, Jerry Quarry, all of these great fighters, was never knocked down in a career that spanned over 20 years. And this fight was stopped because he opened a cut under Chuvalo's right eye, and the cut was so bad that it went all the way down to the bone. And later it was discovered that the bone was actually broken and required surgery. And the eye, seemingly, the referee thought was ready to burst. It was just a slit. And there was another cut on the outside of his left eye, if I remember right, and a gash on top of his scalp. I mean, this looked like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre happened, at Madison Square Garden. And he beats George Chuvalo. And then, of course, this is about the time where Muhammad Ali refuses to be inducted into the draft for the Vietnam War. And they had, backed by ABC Sports, a heavyweight tournament to decide the successor. Now, Frazier was either ranked number 1 or 2 at this time. And you had guys like Jerry Quarry, I think Thad Spencer, Buster Mathis, Ernie Terrell, Floyd Patterson, Jimmy Ellis, Oscar Bonavena. They all entered us to figure out who the heavyweight champion of the world is. Now, Joe Frazier did not enter the tournament. And what happened was the New York State Athletic Commission decided that they were going to have their own heavyweight champion. And they matched Joe Frazier against Buster Mathis. And remember, Buster Mathis is a guy who 4 years before beat him to earn the spot to fight for the gold medal in Tokyo, but was injured and couldn't do anything. Frazier Mathis was actually a highly competitive fight. I think 2 of the judges had Frazier ahead by a little bit, and referee Arthur McCanty had the fight scored even through 10 rounds. And in the 11th, Frazier connected with a short left hook that basically stopped the kingside Buster Mathis, dropped him to the ground, and Frazier wins the New York State version of the heavyweight championship. His first defense was against Manuel Ramos, which we talked about. Ramos was a tough guy, but by the time you get to 1968, Joe Frazier in 1968 is one of the greatest fighters that ever lived. And Oscar Bonavena gets a rematch for the New York State title, and Frazier handles Bonavena much easier. Still a tough fight, but he gets by him rather easily, probably by 4 or 5 rounds. Then he fights a guy by the name of David Ziglowicz, which was in Houston, which was a first-round knockout. And then he fights Jerry Quarry in 1969. Quarry had lost in I think it was the finals, to Jimmy Ellis in the heavyweight tournament to decide the successor. Frazier fights Quarry. Quarry was only 198 pounds, but Frazier was only 203. Frazier was recognized, I think the New York State Athletic Commission was recognized their title by New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, Maine, Pennsylvania, and I think Texas, as well as foreign countries, Mexican and Argentina. And this is one of the great fights that you'll ever see heavyweight-wise, because Jerry Quarry was a bad son of a bitch. And this fight was actually named the Fight of the Year by the Ring magazine. And also, which is interesting, is George Foreman debuted, his professional debut was on the undercard of Frazier Quarry. And Frazier Quarry was an absolute war, and an even war for about the first 3 rounds. And then Frazier's strength kind of wears Quarry down, and he stops Quarry. But anybody that doubts how good Jerry Quarry was just needs to go watch that fight against Joe Frazier. Then he defends against Jimmy Ellis. This is the fight that makes him recognized as the heavyweight champion by most people. Ali's still out there, still hanging around. This is February of 1970. Ali would fight Quarry a couple months later in his comeback fight in Atlanta. But Frazier destroyed Jimmy Ellis, and he took him out, I think it was in the 4th round. And then most people consider Frazier the champion. Now, Bob Foster, the great light heavyweight champion, gets the next shot at Frazier, and Frazier just bludgeons him in 2 rounds. That, I think, was in November or December of 1970. And now the call for Ali Frazier 1 is the biggest there has been for a fight since Schmeling Lewis or Jack Dempsey against Gene Tunney or Jack Johnson versus James J. Jeffries. This fight was called the fight of the century for a reason. And the reason was you had basically two undefeated guys pretty much in their prime that were going to fight for the heavyweight championship of the world. One had never lost it in the ring. The other had picked up where the other one left off and had beaten every contender, Bonavena, Quarry, Ellis, Mathis. He'd beaten everybody. So what you had was March 8th, 1971, outside of Louis Schmeling, and Louis Schmeling is so big because of strictly political, ramifications. You had Ali Frazier 1. Ali Frazier 1 is the greatest fight in the history of the world, not just boxing. I mean, this was an event that Frank Sinatra, to get credentials, was a ringside photographer for Life magazine. And his picture is on the cover of Life magazine. I've actually got that magazine. And each man was guaranteed $2.5 million. It was the largest single payday for any entertainer or athlete in the history of the world at that time. And tickets to the Garden would be made available to the general public by mail on a first-come, first-served basis. Prices in the arena ranged from $20 in the balcony to $150 ringside, which this fight now would probably cost you $15,000 to go watch, and that's probably in the balcony. And the interest in this event was bigger than anything we've seen before or since. And I think few sporting events, World Series, Super Bowl, World Cup, none of those that have ever happened has ever even come close to generate the type of excitement and attention that this prize fight was getting. 50 different countries purchased the rights to televise the fight. The fight was broadcast from ringside in 12 different languages, and the importance of this fight was huge. And when you watch this fight, Bobby, and I suggest anybody go to YouTube, watch this fight. It's the fight of the century. It was a fairly close fight, but Frazier, I think, clearly won the fight. And when you watch this fight, the speed that these two men had with their hands and their feet, Frazier bobbing. Ali had a hard time hitting Frazier, and Frazier never had a hard time hitting anybody. And you got to remember, up to this point, outside of Doug Jones, nobody else had even come close to beating Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, whatever you want to call him. He took 3 years off. He came back and he stopped Jerry Quarry in 3 rounds. Quarry was a hell of a fighter. He stopped Bonavena in 15 rounds. Bonavena was a great fighter. And there's a big hook in the 11th round. Ali goes down. That was kind of the difference in the fight, I think. But this fight, I think, ruined Joe Frazier. I mean, he was still a good fighter after this. But on the night of March 8th, 1971, Joe Frazier was as good as any man that ever went into a boxing ring and laced up the gloves. And he beat Muhammad Ali. He didn't beat Ali probably in his prime because of the 3 years off, but he beat him as close as you could get to his prime. And the ferocity these two men fought with was just something the world has never seen before or since. And I don't think we ever will. And the thing about that fight is, Joe Frazier is the one that ended up in the hospital, and he ended up in the hospital for, I think it was 2 weeks, because of the abuse that he took from Ali. I don't think Ali was ever quite the same after this fight either, because when you get in a fight like that, it takes something out of you. And after that, he fights Terry Daniels, Ron Stander, which were two guys that were, at least Stander was a decent fighter. Daniels didn't have much to offer. He knocks them both out like the 4th or 5th round. He fights George Foreman. And this is actually one of the biggest upsets you'll see in heavyweight boxing history, heavyweight championship history, because Frazier was actually a 3.5-1 favorite to beat George Foreman. And Ali was ringside. Ali was predicting that Joe Frazier would beat him, because if Joe Frazier was good enough to beat him, no man could beat Joe Frazier but him. And Frazier was knocked down 3 times in the first round, 3 times in the second round. And the iconic call from Howard Cosell is, "Down goes Frazier," over and over again. This was shocking because Joe Frazier was seemingly invincible. And that would switch now to where George Foreman was seemingly invincible. Frazier would go on. He beat Joe Bugner in a tough fight. He fought Ali a second time, and he got beat rather easily. He fought a second fight against Quarry. Quarry was not the same by 1974. He beats Jimmy Ellis. That sets up the third fight, which is the Thrilla in Manila, which is a slowed down version of the first fight. I think the first fight was a better fight just because you had two men pretty much in the physical prime, in the speed. And when you watch that fight, there's a video that I have called, I think it's called The Fight, is all it's called. It's a documentary. And it shows all 15 rounds. It's called Ali the Fighter, or it's called The Fighter. Ali and Frazier for 15 rounds. In that first fight, what it is, there's no announcers. All you get is crowd noise and the microphones you had in the corners. And it sounds like these two men for 15 rounds beat each other with baseball bats. And Ali went down once, but other than that, neither one of them, really seriously were hurt. Or they didn't show it. I'm sure they were probably hurt. But the third fight was after Ali had beat the seemingly invincible George Foreman, and Frazier was considered shot by then. And it was something where people thought that Ali was probably going to win the fight fairly easily. They went from splitting money to Ali getting $4.5 million, 43% of the gross. Frazier got $2 million, 22% of the gross, so he got a little bit less than half the money. And this was a fight similar to, I think, Tyson Holyfield, where Tyson gave Holyfield the fight because he thought it was going to be easy, because he didn't think he was the same, or Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury the first time, where he thought it was an easy mark, he'd go make a bunch of money and get out unscathed. But it was an absolute war. It goes 14 rounds, and of course, Ali was still, he loved to call Frazier an Uncle Tom. He'd call him the white man's champion. And Joe Frazier hated Ali because of that. And Ali and Frazier, the thing that was interesting to me is you remember the iconic 1996 Summer Olympic where Ali lit the torch. And he had Parkinson's, and he's shaking up there right next to the cauldron with the flame, and he lights the flame. They asked Joe Frazier the day after what he was thinking when he watched that. And Joe Frazier said, I was hoping he'd shake so much he'd fall in the flame. So
man.
There was
I never heard that.
Yeah, there was a lot of bad blood between the two. Frazier used to joke that, the way Ali talked to him, the way Ali treated him, the way Ali'd call him a dumb gorilla, and that Ali basically, with how he ended up, he deserved because of the way he treated other people. And I know that there were times, I know the two respected each other, but I think that Ali went way over the line when he was doing the stuff he was doing. Now, Frazier, after that third fight, he had a rematch with George Foreman. He basically retired in 1976, briefly returned in 1981 against Jumbo Cummings. He got a draw, which he didn't deserve. He lost the fight. And he went from being a rich man to a poor man, as so many of these athletes do, especially when they grow up poor. His post-boxing years saw him manage the career of his oldest son, Marvis, who was he was a terrific fighter, but he was not big enough to be a heavyweight. And by his 10th or 11th fight, Joe has maneuvered him into a heavyweight championship fight against Larry Holmes. Marvis gets destroyed. Then they throw Marvis in against a young Mike Tyson in 1986. He gets destroyed even quicker by Mike Tyson. And I think the problem with Marvis is, I got to interview him, and Marvis was so caught up into wanting to make his dad proud of him, and his dad was so sure that his son could beat anybody just because it's Smoking Joe's son, that I think that kind of screwed up the career. Now, the thing that makes you know how big Ali Frazier was he also trained his daughter, Jackie Frazier Lyde. Now, Jackie Frazier took up boxing and eventually thought Ali's daughter, you remember Layla Ali, in a fight called Ali Frazier 4. Ali came out victorious. The fight did, actually, for women's boxing, it did really good on pay-per-view because they put the fight on pay-per-view for some reason. And it was a damn good fight. So to tell you how great Ali and Frazier, those two names together were, you put the daughters together and they're making $1 million. Frazier had...
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, Frazier had 11 children. He had a longtime girlfriend of 40 years who, with 11 children, he obviously wore out. And in September of 2011, Frazier was diagnosed with liver cancer. The disease spread quickly on him, and by November of 2011, he had died of liver cancer in his home in Philadelphia. But this is a guy that in 2014, they put a statue in Philadelphia up to Joe Frazier, which is something that should have been done a long time ago, because there is a statue of a fictional heavyweight called Rocky Balboa in Philadelphia that was put up there in the early 80s. Joe Frazier was a true life superhero that accomplished amazing things. And to tell you how our society is, there was no statue to Smoking Joe Frazier in Philadelphia until 2 years after he died, so he didn't even know that it happened. And he's a guy that I think is underappreciated. But on March 8th, 1971, in what was one of the two biggest fights in boxing history, along with Louis Schmeling too, that night he beat Muhammad Ali. That makes him, in my mind, you look at his overall career, he has to be a top 10 heavyweight of all time.
Yes. So where do you have him? About number 9, right? Last time we.
No, I think
asked
this, and I've said it before. To me, it's Ali and Lewis. After that, 3 through 10, I don't care who you rank where. With Frazier, I would probably put him somewhere between 7 and 10.
Right, and you've got Holmes third, but I know that you really like him a lot. That
Yeah,
might
I think
be a little
if
high
Holmes
compared to
fought
other
Frazier,
people.
let's not get this wrong. March 8th, 1971, I think that outside of Joe Louis and a prime Ali, which would have been 3 years before, and even then, I don't know that Joe Louis or any version of Muhammad Ali could have handled Joe Frazier March 8th, 1971, because that night, he was as special as any boxer has ever been. And if you have not seen this fight, anybody out there that's not seen it, you need to go watch it. Because when you watch it, if you don't have an appreciation for what those two men do, you probably shouldn't be betting or watching on sports.
Absolutely, and since our talk here, I mean, I know I've got 2 things that I've got to do late night when my work is done and I'm not tired yet. I'll be watching 2 fights, and that's the Corey fight, and that's the Ali Frazier number 1 fight.
Yeah,
that's the
there's never been a better
for me
fight,
to watch.
but never been a better fight than Ali Frazier won. All right, guys.
And then
Good.
second point I just want to bring up real quickly is Ali coming back after 3 years to fight Corey as your first fight back. That's amazing to me, Mike.
Well, the interesting thing about that is, though, I would like to see what would have happened in October 1970 if Corey doesn't get cut. Because if you watch that fight, Corey seems to be coming on, and Ali seems to be getting a little gassed because he hadn't fought in 3 years. But Corey got a huge cut over his eye from a Ali punch. That's what stopped the fight. I would like to know, I think Ali probably would have gutted it out, because the thing that stood out to me about Muhammad Ali and why he's one of the 2 greatest fighters I've ever seen as a heavyweight, not one of the 2 greatest of all time, but as a heavyweight, one of the 2 greatest of all time, was something I saw Mike Tyson say. They asked Mike Tyson about Muhammad Ali, and this was like probably 3 or 4 months ago, and he said, I could have never beaten Muhammad Ali. And they asked him why, and he said, the Larry Holmes fight. And Larry Holmes is a fight where Ali's 38 years old, has nothing left. Holmes couldn't even get him on the ground, couldn't put him on the canvas. And Mike Tyson's comment was, he said, as soon as I saw that fight, I knew that I could never beat a guy like Muhammad Ali, because Muhammad Ali, if they wouldn't have stopped that fight before the 11th round started, was willing to die in that ring to try to win that fight. And Mike Tyson said, I was never willing to die in a ring to win a fight. And I think when you watch Joe Louis, when you watch Muhammad Ali, when you watch a prime Larry Holmes, I mean, Larry Holmes, the shot he took against Ernie Shavers to put him down would have killed a normal man. But the thing is, Ali was willing to risk everything to win a fight.
Right. And that says it all about that guy.
You there?
Mike, that says it all about him.
I thought we cut out. All right, so we're going to wrap the show up. I want to remind people to check out BetNow.eu. 50% cashback bonus on your first deposit up to $1,000. Also, if you like to bet the baseball games, make sure you hit up the BetNow Grand Slam Challenge. Remember, promo code TRUTH50 to get that 50% discount. Also, check out Phil Rankin with the handicapping guide halfway down the page on thegruelingtruth.com. Click that. You can get multiple tracks, top 4 to 7 horses in every race from 4 different tracks, $5 a day. Make sure you check out the Sheridan Report where you get the top play of the day for $5. You can get the Sheridan Report for $10 a day, or you can get it for the entire month for $50. Tonight, Inside Boxing Daily, me and Jeremiah Pricer will be on to talk a little Pacquiao-Thurman. And with that fight fast approaching, make sure you check out the Ringside Boxing Show on thegruelingtruth.com, where last night they had Keith Thurman, one time the welterweight champion of the world, on the show to discuss the upcoming fight with Manny Pacquiao. Also, tonight, me and Jeremiah will touch on that fight a little bit too, because today, of course, it was announced no VADA testing, no steroid testing before the Manny Pacquiao-Keith Thurman fight. Both sides have agreed to that.
Wow.
We'll talk about what's up there because we all know Manny Pacquiao's done them before. We all know 90% of these guys playing sports now are doing them before. And also,
Yes.
we're going to talk about that a little bit baseball-wise tomorrow, Bobby, when we have me, you, Lucas, and Steve on to discuss the state of Major League Baseball. So everybody needs to check out also. Should be a really interesting show. But we're going to go ahead and wrap it up now.
I agree.
Remember, BetNow.eu, Truth50 is the promo code to get a 50% discount up to your first deposit of $1,000. You can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify. Wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for Bobby Sheridan, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.